Did you know that 50% of the vineyards in the ancient winemaking region of Constantia, South Africa, are planted with Sauvignon Blanc? Another little interesting tidbit is that the Sauvignon Blancs from the Constantia Valley are suitably age-worthy and will gather depth and complexity over up to 10 years. But we're not here to discuss any of those beauties. Instead, in today's Hand Drink Solar Wine info video, we are going to discuss one of only 2 Rieslings in the entire world that have been designated Wine of Origin Constantia. Today's wine of the day is Fledge Co's Heart of Stone Riesling. And in case you weren't paying attention to the details, you might at this point exclaim, but Han, who is madcap enough to attempt such an outlandish coup? And the answer, of course, as I hinted at earlier, is the savant winemaking team of Margot Nell and Leon Kotzer from Fledge Co in Carletsdorp. We've discussed before just how far and wide their travels take them as they attempt to discover these hidden treasures in the South African winelands. But what we haven't touched on is just how far and wide the influence of their wines has spread around the world. And I think it's quite important to do so, because sometimes when wine nerds get together, they make the mistake of thinking that they are but a single handful of renegades, a tiny remnant that stands fast against a world of mass-produced wine. But it's not true. The fact is that around the world, there are countless such tiny pockets, small remnants, which together form a delightfully engaged international community. The fact that Fledge Co wines, whether it be their Swartland Chenin, or their Klein Karoo Tinta Barocca, or their Carletsdorp Suzau, or their Constantia Riesling, are to be found in places as far-flung as Canada, or Denmark, or Germany, or Japan, or Reunion, is a sign that I think the kids are going to be all right. But forget the rest of the world for a second, because we're going to focus on the wine in the glass. As I said, today's wine is a Riesling Wine of Origin Constantia, one of only 2 of its kind in the world. And again, you may say, well, this is a bit of a surprise, given that the valley has staked its reputation on aromatic whites. As we said, there are currently 360 hectares of vines in Constantia, and about 180 hectares of those are Sauvignon Blanc. So you'd think that Riesling would be a safe bet alongside those vineyards. But I think the statistic says more about the market for Riesling locally and internationally than it does about the suitability of Riesling in Constantia. From a climatic perspective, Constantia is a fascinating place because even though most of its slopes face north or northeast directly into the hot African sun, it is on a sort of peninsula surrounded on at least 3 sides by the really cold Atlantic Ocean. So while Constantia is not as cold as Elgin or Agulhas or Walker Bay, it has a perpetual flow of cold air coming in off that ocean from multiple fronts. This means that while the rest of the South African winelands may be prone to regular heat waves, Constantia always has enough cooling influence in order to keep its ambient temperature somewhere below that gnarly cutoff of about 35 degrees Celsius. But returning to the wine of the day, perhaps this particular vineyard has survived the encroaching Sauvignon Blanc spread precisely because its site is just so well suited to Riesling. For starters, it's on a southeast facing slope, which means in South Africa it's going to have greatly reduced solar radiation, which in turn prevents buildup of those precursors or building blocks that will become TDN later on in the winemaking process. Added to this, it's also sitting at a healthy altitude of just below 250 meters above sea level, further lowering the ambient temperature of the site. And now that we understand the vineyard, let's get into the glass. Well, the first impression is just how clean and fresh it is. There are notes of mandarin and honeysuckle and jasmine, and even a sort of leesy, creamy cheesecake element. Those leesy hints may well come from the fact that half of the wine was fermented in stainless steel tank, but then left on its gross lees for up to 8 months. This would give time for those leesy elements to work their way into the wine. The other half of the juice was fermented in old oak puncheons, but really, as much as I've sniffed this wine, I find it very hard to detect any sort of oaky elements whatsoever, or even oxidative elements. And when we take a sip, that only serves to support my theory. Again, the wine is fresh, clean, tight, tidy. All the notes we smelt follow through onto the palate. There is that mandarin element, there's fresh orange sherbet, there's apricot fruit, And then finally, there's even a sort of sweeter homemade lemonade element, which is quite engaging. If you're a fan of clean, dry, modern Rieslings with just a hint of the old world, then this is a wine that will really serve you well. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the Hendrik Solar YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month where we talk about wine science and wine history and unusual cultivars and some of the rising dynamic winemaking stars to come out of the South African winelands.